in the 1930s, people were speaking about turbines at sea. So they decided to go offshore, and we had the good luck to build the first project. Wind power, even offshore wind power, is cheaper than any fossil power source. To tackle climate change, we need lots and lots and lots of young people.
So, the other movement has been first turbines on the land, then turbines in the sea, and now you're talking about floating turbines. So how do you see that movement happening?
In 89, so what is that now? 35 years ago, the Danish government realized that there would be a limit to how much onshore wind we could build without people feeling really annoyed by having turbines in the landscape. And therefore they decided to build a couple of demo projects in the sea. It had been spoken about a lot, even back in the 1930s, people were speaking about turbines at sea, and it was a big issue at the start of the industry. But then the California boom simply stole the picture, and everybody only spoke about onshore machines. So it was always there, maybe at some point in time. And here in Denmark, the government was actually far-seeing not to say, this is it. So they decided to go offshore, and we had the good luck to build the first project in the world. I was responsible for the turbine design, and we installed it in 91. And Vestas, this was Bonus, and Vestas installed their first project in 95. We installed the first project with big turbines outside Copenhagen in 2000, and then it kind of grew from there. The advantages are obvious. You are not disturbing people near their dwellings. There's plenty of space. You might even get out of sight. If you're 40 kilometers out, you can't see the turbines. And the wind is more stable and more abundant offshore. So there are a lot of good motivations. But of course, there's also a cost issue. It is more costly to put them out there. And service is much, much more difficult. So you can only do this with super robust equipment. But it is a big success. And here in Europe, plans are that between a third and half of all electricity shall within the next 20 years or so come from offshore wind. And
fixed
the industry
offshore or floating offshore?
From bottom fixed, as we call it. And if you look at the accessible resource in the world for bottom fixed offshore wind, so that basically means where you have the foundation on the seabed, and you can do that nowadays out to about 60 meters. If you go beyond 60, it becomes very expensive. Then the total available resource that can be commercially exploited corresponds to, roughly speaking, the total world electricity consumption. That's of course nice. But the problem is that it is almost all of it located in 3 specific regions, and that most of the rest of the world only has spot-wise areas where you can do that. So the 3 regions are in the North Sea and the Baltic in northwestern Europe, where we have started. The first projects were there, the biggest projects, the biggest build-out is there. Off the coast of China, that's coming up rapidly, and off the east coast of the US. And then Japan has a bit, and Korea has a bit, and Taiwan, and Australia, and so on. But it's small stuff. And many places in the world, you can't do it at all. You can't do it at all on the US West Coast. Can't do it around most of South America, around most of Southeast Asia, and so on. By getting rid of the constraint that the water cannot be deeper than 60 meters, you roughly speaking multiply the resource available by a factor of 10. That's very important. But you also, so to speak, democratize it so that it'll become available to much, much larger groups of populations than bottom fixed offshore wind. And there are many places where you don't need it. You can do onshore wind or you can do solar. But there are also many places in the world where you don't have the space for that or don't have the resource for that. You take away agricultural land for solar and so on. And that's where offshore wind really is smart, because it does disturb fishing interests, but mostly not to a very severe degree. But it relieves all the habitation land from any issues. You basically, I think of it sometimes as invisible power. You get a cable,
Yes.
it comes in full of, so to speak, electrons that want to do work, but you can't see anything out there because it's out of sight.
Yes.
And the biggest issue with this, in a way, very straightforward thinking, is that just like offshore wind is more expensive than onshore wind, then floating offshore wind is more expensive than bottom fixed offshore wind. So what we are working with in my little company is floating offshore wind that has been industrialized, thereby using the what should we say, experiences from the wind industry as a whole. The wind industry started out as a costly but attractive alternative to fossils. We would like to do wind because it doesn't pollute, it doesn't change the climate, etc. It's just too expensive. That was the statement for many, many years. We overcame that. Now, at least in Western Europe, wind power, even offshore wind power, is cheaper than any fossil power source. And then you can say, how did you do that? And a person like me can say, oh yes, but that's because we did a lot of technology development and we had all those smart ideas and so on. But the honest answer is because we went from small scale production to genuine mass production, because that's how you get the cost down. I have an fairly old smartphone, an iPhone 6 or whatever, it's not important. I bought this for $500 roughly. Yes. If I was to get the first one in the whole world, I would probably pay $1 million or more. I pay 500 because $1 million are made. That's how you get the cost down. So that thinking is also what we are working on now on floating offshore wind and on hydrogen production and other things, is simply to say, well, there's a nice recipe for making cheap stuff. That is that it has to be made in factories. That's how you make it cheap. It has to be mass produced. And that is how we are building our floating offshore foundation and our hydrogen plants. Everything that you can put into a factory needs to go into a factory.
So this is very exciting. What is over the next 20, 30 years, what do you think could be the stage of the wind turbines? What percentage of the overall electricity can potentially come from this source, displacing the fossil fuels, hopefully for all times to come?
Yeah. In Denmark, which is a company that is well treated by nature regarding the wind resource, we could easily get to 100%. Then you, of course, have stability issues on the grid because there's not always wind. But we have the good luck to have strong interconnectors with our neighbor countries. And if we did not have that, we could make part of the wind power into hydrogen, store it, and combust it for producing electricity when there was no wind. We can easily go to 100%. There are most parts in the world can't do that, but we could ultimately get to something where wind power is 30 or 40% of the total energy consumption in the whole world. Solar power, the same or maybe more, and then a remainder for biofuels and nuclear. So getting to a completely decarbonized energy system basically does not have any technology challenge. We don't need to invent something new. It's not about technology, it's about implementation. And the world could decide that is what it wants to do.
Excellent. So what is, over your period of maybe 45, 50 years of work, you have really seen, a wind turbine at your farm to now such turbines at such a huge area and your significant contribution over this whole period of time. What would be your message to the young students who are getting into the new world? What would be your message for them?
It's clear that when we spoke before our conversation, you mentioned that you're interested in technology and science and so on for students. I have a little bit broader statement, and then I'll get back to the science part. The broader statement is that I hope that as many students as possible will take seriously the big challenges in the world, out of which the biggest one that I think, we have the threat of nuclear war. We've had that for 80 years. But the biggest threat for the well-being of our children and our grandchildren, and if you're a young person, even yourself, is climate change. And there, to tackle climate change, we need lots and lots and lots of young people in all kinds of technical fields, all kinds of non-technical fields, and at all levels. We need them at the workforce level in the factory and in the field. We need them at the scientific and engineering part of building the turbines, but we also need legal people to make agreements, and people to do human relations in companies, people to manage the accounts of companies and so on, people to take part in government decisions and to create regulations around renewables and so on. So you can say that the sort of first message is that this is really, if you want to do something in your life where you can look back and say, I actually did the right things, then working in the fight against climate change is really a very, very important way forward. Part of my own thinking about how you get a good life in your professional life is about, I call it purpose, mastery, autonomy. It's a good thing to know that you're working for something for the greater good. Mastery, that is this feeling that you're actually pretty good at what you do. That's what I try to create for the workforce in the company that I have started after I retired, is that it's a really intoxicating feeling. My best guess is that you, as an interviewer, and your good colleagues who take care of the technology around the thing you are doing here, that you and they actually feel, we are actually doing, this was a good day, we did well. That's a fantastic feeling. And I have been involved in wind has almost always been, we're actually pretty good at what we do. I started with these small companies that were able to make a position in the world by focusing and working hard. And then autonomy, that most of us feel quite good about not being micromanaged. So that's also a thing to strive for. When it comes to the more harder subjects like physics and mathematics and engineering and so on, fortunately, the renewables field, and I can speak mostly for wind, has everything. It's about aerodynamics and very hard sciences about that and materials and so on. But it's also about engineering. How do you dimension things so that they don't break and so on? It's about electronics, power controls, concrete, fiberglass materials. How do you execute things? How do you build up supply chains and so on? There's basically room for anybody with an interest in shall we say, creating things. If you kind of ask, but actually, I'm more interested in computing or in visualizing. We need people who can do vision systems to help in service or help in production. But I'm more interested in square bracket, insert what you want. Yes, you can still get that job in the energy industry. And one of our biggest shortcomings is skilled people. So when we look at this big build out of turbines, what I very often hear here in Europe, I have to say, and in the US is, but where will we get the people from? And that's where a country like India, which we all know has this bright future ahead of us, could become the engineering and science supplier to the world, which it already is in many respects. Most of us have worked with or work with Indian colleagues. I have Indian people working with me in the company, and I'm fascinated about their skills and capabilities. So the core message is work on what you think is interesting. Focus on what makes you feel I'm actually pretty good at this. And then there will be plenty of room for you in the renewable energy industry.
Excellent. This is a very, very inspiring message. Purpose, mastery, autonomy, and developing skills. I think
Yes.
this is the best message for our young, inspiring
Yes.
leaders of tomorrow. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Mr. Stiesdal. This has been
Yeah.
very, very exciting, very interesting. We were so happy we could take your journey from the initial days, from your school days, all the way up to where you are, and how that line almost coincides with the growth of renewable energy in the world. This is just fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.